Good morning, students. Today we will start a new topic, which is overhead cost. You have learned what is material cost. You have learned the details about the material cost. Then the labor cost you have learned. And today we will start the overhead cost. Okay. Now what do you mean by overhead cost? Overhead refers to the ongoing cost to operate a business, but excludes the direct cost associated with creating a product or service. Overhead can be fixed, variable, or a hybrid of both. That can be semi-variable. There exist different categories of overhead, such as administrative overhead, which include costs related to managing a business. Now there can be office overhead also, then factory overhead also. Now I'm giving you an example of administrative overheads. Okay. Now overhead costs are the operating cost of a business enterprise, which cannot be traced directly to a particular unit of output. Means these are the costs which are not directly related with the product or service. That means from the product or service, you cannot make out or you cannot conveniently identify the cost. From the products or services, and the cost which cannot be conveniently identified from the product or services is called the overhead cost. Okay, that means the overhead costs are those costs which are indirectly related with the product. Okay, they cannot be traced directly to a particular unit of output. Okay, so you can also say that these are the aggregate of indirect material cost, indirect wages, and indirect expenses. So all the indirect costs are the overheads, are the overhead cost. Okay. So in short, overhead costs are those costs which are indirectly related with the production of a product or with the manufacturing of a product. The overhead costs are those costs which cannot be traced directly to a particular unit of output. Okay, these are the indirect cost. Now let me give you one definition. Overhead cost, how is this defined? Overhead costs are all costs on the income statement except for direct labor, direct material, and direct expenses. And overhead costs, as I have already told you, overhead costs are the indirect cost. Let me give you one more example of overhead. Okay. Overhead cost, according to ICMA, Institute of Cost and Management Accountant, overhead cost is defined as the aggregate of indirect material costs, indirect wages, and indirect expenses. Okay, the cost of indirect material, indirect labor, and such other expenses, including services, as cannot conveniently be charged direct to specific cost units. Alternatively, overhead are all expenses other than the direct expenses. So in short, if I have to say, you can say that overhead are all the expenses other than the direct expenses. Okay, leaving aside the direct expenses, all other expenses are called the overhead expenses or the overhead cost. Okay.